Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 Minutes of Torah Study for the Torah portion of Bo. You may recall that a week or two ago, there was a Mega Millions lottery jackpot of about $1.35 billion, something along that area. And if you asked most people, what would you do with that money if you won it? Most people would have a very long list and a very full detailed plan, exactly what they would do if they won that amount of money. Now, what if you won a much smaller amount of money? Recently, I saw a reel on Instagram where a person proposed the question, what would you do if somebody gave you $10,000? The person said if they got $10,000, they would immediately go online. They would rent an apartment in a particular building in Seattle and sign a contract that allows them to sublet it. They would then market that apartment to the programmers and people traveling into Seattle for business, renting that apartment for 3 times the amount, right? There was a whole plan how this person is turning this $10,000 into easy $2,500 a month income, right? People have these ideas that if they would get an influx of cash, whether a lot, whether a little, there's a plan. They know exactly what they want to do with it. Now, I want to ask a question, similar idea to this, but slightly different. And that is the idea that people have a bucket list, right? That before they exit this planet after 120 years, there are certain things they want to do. There are certain things that they want to accomplish. They're important, they're valuable, they're meaningful, and we got a bucket list. Now, for some people, they may have already accomplished many things on the bucket list. So then we could answer that question or ask the question a slightly different way. If you are going to tell someone, a friend of yours, there is something that you must do in this life, you cannot miss it out, do not hit 120 before you do and accomplish this, what would that be? Let's try to answer this question based on this week's Torah portion. In this week's Torah portion, the Jewish people are given a command. You must take for yourself a Pesach sacrifice. You must take for yourself a lamb. You're going to slaughter that lamb. You're going to take blood from the lamb. You're going to put it on your doorpost. Then we're going to have the 10th plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn. God will pass over all of the Jewish homes that have the blood on the lintel. The Jewish people will be saved. We are commanded to continue for all future generations to fulfill this mitzvah of taking the Pesach lamb, which will cause us to remember when we were in Egypt and God passed over all of our homes. But what exactly is the reason, the purpose that we were commanded to take a lamb to begin with and then to slaughter it? What was the goal? What was the logic behind it? So let's look at what Rashi has to say. Rashi quotes the Talmud. Rabbi Masya ben Charash used to say, God said, the time to fulfill the oath that I swore to Avram that I would redeem his children has arrived. But the Jewish people had no commandments in their hands with which to occupy themselves in order that they be redeemed, as the verse states, but you were naked and bare. So he gave them 2 mitzvahs, the blood of the Pesach and the blood of the circumcision. They circumcised themselves on that night, as the verse states, downtrodden with your blood, with 2 types of blood. Now, on the surface of it, it might seem that this answers our question. Why were we given the mitzvah of Korban Pesach to sacrifice this lamb? It's because we were naked of mitzvahs. Therefore, God instructed us with the mitzvah of a Pesach lamb and the mitzvah of circumcision. However, this text actually brings up a much bigger, larger question, which is the beginning of the text said, and I will go right back to it here, the time to fulfill the oath that I swore to Avram, that I would redeem his children, has arrived. Right? This leads to this question. Why did God have to give the Jewish people any mitzvahs? Fine, they were naked of mitzvahs, they were bare of any mitzvahs. But God promised Abraham. God told Avram, I promise that in this and this time, I am going to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. Why did he have to give them mitzvahs? The mitzvahs that appear to be irrelevant. God had to take the Jewish people out of Egypt because he promised the Jewish people that he was going to take them out of Egypt. Another question. Why did God have to give the Jewish people mitzvahs right now? Yes, they were naked. However, they were soon going to go to Mount Sinai, where they were going to receive the Torah, and they were going to have 613 mitzvahs. In fact, when Moshe was arguing with God at the burning bush, saying, I don't want to have anything to do with it, one of the questions he says to God, one of the challenges he says to God, with what merit do these Jewish people have that they should be redeemed from slavery? And God responds to them, I'll tell you what merit. The merit is, I got a plan for these people. I'm going to bring them to Mount Sinai. I'm going to give them the Torah. That is what merit they have to be redeemed. So how come all of a sudden God needs to give the Jewish people 2 mitzvahs? Another question. What's so special about the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, about the Pesach lamb? If God is giving the Jewish people 2 mitzvahs, they must be big. They must be important. They must be really special. The mitzvah of circumcision, we get it, we understand. The circumcision means you are entering into a covenant with the Jewish people. But why Korban? Why slaughtering a lamb? Why is that so special and unique at this time? And finally, one more question. Why the need for 2 mitzvahs? If we're going to say that the Jewish people, right, did not have any mitzvahs, fine, give the Jewish people 1 mitzvah. Now they have a merit. If you're going to say that 1 mitzvah is not enough, why 2? How does 2 become enough? There's 613 mitzvahs. At least give the 10 commandments or something. 3 mitzvahs, 10 mitzvahs. Why 2 mitzvahs at this time? The short answer is the reason that God gave the Jewish people 2 mitzvahs is because those 2 mitzvahs were going to solve a 2-part problem that the Jewish people were facing. The Jewish people were not just naked and bare. Naked and bare of mitzvahs would imply that the Jewish people, from a spiritual perspective, were on the level 0. They were not on the level 0. They were minus 0. They were, in fact, minus 1. The Jewish people needed 2 mitzvahs. Number 1, just to get them to 0. And they needed a second mitzvah to get them to 1, where they would actually have some type of merit themselves. Like, look what it says in Chesed LaAvraham. Our sages have a tradition that the Jewish people were so contaminated with the profanity of Egypt that by the time the eve of Pesach arrived, they had entered into the 49th chamber of impurity. Had they crossed over into the 50th, they would have passed the point of no return. This is the deeper meaning of the words of the Haggadah. Had God not taken our forefathers out of Egypt, we and our children and grandchildren would still be enslaved to Paro in Egypt. This is why the Exodus is cited in the Torah 50 times. The Jewish people were in a bad state. They were really, really in a bad state. So much so that the angels actually complain to God and say, why are you punishing the Egyptians? Why should the Egyptians have to die? The Jewish people are no better. So at this point in time, the Jewish people were in a serious situation. So they needed 2 mitzvahs. They needed 1 mitzvah to schlep the Jewish people out of the Egyptian mud. The Jewish people were stuck, they were mired, they were sinking in the corrupt, immoral, unethical, idol-worshipping mud of the Egyptians. Therefore, they had to sacrifice a lamb. And number 2, they had to do something positive. They had to affirm who they are, what they stood for, their Jewish identity, and that was through having a bris, through a circumcision. So the circumcision we understand. But why is it that the lamb, the Pesach sacrifice, is considered to be the mitzvah that schleps the Jewish people out of the Egyptian mud, so to speak, which they were stuck in? The answer is because the Egyptians actually worshipped the lamb. The Egyptians worshipped the lamb. That was considered to be their God. Look what Moshe said. But Moshe said it is improper to do that, for we will sacrifice the Toeva, the Egyptians, to God our Lord. We will sacrifice the deity of the Egyptians before their eyes, and they will not stone us.
What the hell is going on here?
But Avi, are you there? Can you hear it? Can you hear me? All right, I'm gonna move you over there. But if you have something to say, please let me know. I hope that you can hear us clearly, Avi. All right, so Moshe says to God, you want us to take the God of the Egyptians and sacrifice it? They're going to stone us, right? They're going to stone us. It's going to be so dangerous. It's going to be crazy. But this, in fact, is the entire purpose. How do the Jewish people disconnect themselves from the idolatry of Egypt? By specifically taking the God of Egypt and sacrificing it. And not in a private way, but in a public way. As God commands the Jewish people, for 4 days, you must take the lamb, you got to tie it to your bedpost, publicize it, everyone's going to know about it, that what are the Jewish people going to do? And day 4, 3, 2, 1, sacrifice, barbecue, and eat the Egyptian god. This was enough to separate them from the idol worship of the Egyptians. The Al-Sheikh explains it like this. It was necessary for God to give the Jewish people 2 mitzvahs, for as it is well known, the Jewish people worshipped the Lamb. For an idolater to achieve redemption, 2 things are required: to remove the filth of impurity, and therefore to be inducted into the halls of holiness, similar to the twin notions of do good and turn away from evil. The impurity of idolatry was removed through the blood of the Paschal Lamb, namely slaughtering the Egyptian deity. This alluded to in the verse, withdraw and take for yourselves. Withdraw from idolatry and take for yourselves a lamb. But this is not enough. After the impurity was removed, the people still needed to be inducted into godly service, namely to be signed and sealed with the holy sign as God's servants. This then is the purpose of the second blood of the circumcision. So now we got to get back to the question that we asked before. If God promised Abraham that he's going to take the Jewish people out, why did we need to do these mitzvahs? Yes, it's all beautiful what we just said, but there was a promise. God had to fulfill his promise. Why did God command it to us? The reason is actually beautiful. That yes, it's true, God would have had to redeem us from Egypt, even if we had no mitzvahs. Why did he give us the mitzvahs? God wanted to give the people the opportunity to go out with their heads held a bit higher and to truly earn their spot at Sinai a few months later. Yes, God could have taken us out, but we would have not deserved it. We would not have earned it. It would be like getting that free bread that no one's proud of, that no one's excited over. God gave us mitzvahs, mitzvahs that we could stand on our own 2 feet, mitzvahs that we could raise our head high, that we have fulfilled under stress, under challenges. The God of the Egyptians, under risk to our life. The Jewish people could hold their heads high as they left Egypt in that circumstance. There's another reason as well. The Exodus of Egypt represented a new period in time in history. The ability to transform evil into good. When the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt and then left Egypt, it wasn't just a personal issue about a nation. It represented taking the nation of Egypt, which represented all that was bad in the world, and transforming it into something more positive, extracting from that physical and material place something good and something holy. And that is what they did when they slaughtered that Pesach lamb. When they slaughtered the Pesach lamb, they weren't just eradicating an idol worship, they transformed it into a mitzvah. It became a korban Pesach. It became the Paschal lamb. So it was a critical part of the development of the Jewish people that they take something that was so Egyptian and make it something that was actually so Jewish. And we see this in another area as well. God promised Abraham that when I set your children free, they're going to be rich, they're going to be wealthy. They're going to borrow items from the Egyptians, take it out of Egypt. It's going to be unbelievable. Now, the Jewish people had quite a strong claim to God. They could say, God, how about this? How about you take us out of Egypt now, today? We don't have to be slaves for even 1 second more, and don't give us the money, right? Don't give us all the issue. Let's go now, and don't worry about the money. But you know what God said? No. The Jewish people had to stay in Egypt until the right time when God was going to redeem them. The Jewish people had to take whatever possible with them. They had to clean out Egypt of their wealth. Why? Because the goal was the ultimate transfer of Egyptian property into spiritual possession. They were transforming that which was so Egyptian into something that was actually so Jewish. So this is a big part of what the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, was about, the transformation of that which was Egyptian to something wholly positive and Jewish. So what comes out from this whole story is a very important principle, which is, even though God is good and kind and gracious, took us out of Egypt, will take us out of exile, and so on, God wanted us to earn our redemption back then, and God wants us to earn our redemption from the current exile and ultimately the Messianic era. How do we earn it? Through mitzvahs. God gave us mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are the way we can hold our head high. Mitzvahs are the way that we can earn the kindness that God does for us and the ultimate redemption, which is going to bring for us. The Rebbe adds another comment in his essay on this issue. He says, who is the sage that taught us this, that gave us this insight that God does a kindness for us, that he wants us to earn the redemption by doing mitzvahs? It was Rabbi Masya ben Chorash. Who was Rabbi Masya ben Chorash? He was a leading sage in the land of Israel in the era of the Mishnah. After the Jewish people lost the war with Bar Kochba, when Bar Kochba was defeated by the Romans, what did he choose to do? He moved to Rome. Not only did he move to Rome, he opened a yeshiva in Rome, and it actually became the biggest yeshiva of that time, Rabbi Masya ben Chorash in Rome. Why did he do it? Why did he go to Rome? The Rebbe explains. Rabbi Masya ben Chorash would consistently comfort his students about the fact that they lived in Rome. He would tell them that the future redemption depended on them being in a Roman environment, and to establish a yeshiva within that environment. In other words, the task is to find a Jew who's stuck in a Roman situation, that is, he or she is bare from mitzvahs, and to render them no longer Roman, rather a yeshiva student. For this reason, Rabbi Masya ben Chorash's yeshiva was specifically in Rome, in the hotbed of exile, so as to reach out to that Roman Jew and thereby bring the redemption. So the Rebbe says something here that's so powerful and so relevant to the times that we're living in right now. Why are we in exile? How could we still be in exile? Have we not suffered enough? 2,000 years, expulsions, pogroms, crusades, the Holocaust, and yet we're still here committed to God 2,000 years later. How come God has not taken us out? The truth is, God could take us out at any time. But perhaps you can argue, based on the precedent from the Exodus of Egypt, why have we not been taken out of exile yet? Because there are still Jews out there who have not had the ability to do a mitzvah. For whatever circumstances, maybe no fault of their own, their education, their upbringing, their background, there are Jews out there who have not yet had an opportunity to do a mitzvah. And God does not want us to go out bare. God does not want us to go out naked. No Jew should be without at least one mitzvah to show for him or herself. And until then, we have a lot of work to do. The Rebbe says this is an instruction for each and every one of us who have been privileged to be able to study Torah, have been privileged to be able to do mitzvahs, who are privileged to be part of a Jewish community. We cannot rest until every Jew does a mitzvah, till every Jew is a part of it. We cannot rest until every Jew we know, that we reach out to them to give them an opportunity to be a part of it. And the Rebbe says, and you know what? Go to Rome if you have to, right? This is not just about local. Do whatever you can, where you can, reach out to include every Jew in the beautiful community and the beautiful mitzvahs. And this goes back to the original question that we asked at the beginning of the class. If there is something that you can tell your friends, right? Don't miss this. You can't live 120 years, right, without doing it. It's a mitzvah. The Maldives, maybe it's debatable. Depends what season you go into the Maldives. But doing a mitzvah, that's a must. To be included, to be part ultimately of the Jewish people, to be connected to Hashem in the most real, obvious way, to do something that is so meaningful, it's not just a one-time event, right? The Rambam says it could be one mitzvah that one person performs that transforms the entire world, that schleps us out of Galus, out of exile, and ultimately brings about Mashiach and the Messianic era. So we have to reach out to our friends and family to invite them, be a part of it. It's not meaningless one mitzvah that you're going to do. No, any mitzvah that you can do can be the one that can actually bring about the final redemption. So what is the value of a person doing a mitzvah even one time? Now, of course, we'd like a person to do a mitzvah more than one time. But what's the value of doing a mitzvah even one time? Number one, right, it has the ability to actually change the world. You could transform the world and bring about the Messianic era. But number two, I want to share a beautiful story. I know I've shared it on Shabbos, but it's worth hearing again and again. Rabbi Pinchas Taylor is a Chabad rabbi in Florida. And he was leading a birthright group to Israel. And he's sitting on the plane on the way to Israel next to a rabbi who works in Jewish outreach, but not a Chabad rabbi. And they're talking and engaging with each other about the value of doing one mitzvah, because in Chabad, we give a person the opportunity to put on tefillin, to light Shabbos candles. Here's some matzah. We're very big into doing a mitzvah one time. And this non-Chabad rabbi says, I want to tell you a story that happened to me. He said he has a good friend of his who's an outreach rabbi specifically focusing on teenagers at risk, right? Teenagers who are having a hard and difficult, challenging time with their parents, with Judaism, with life. That's what he does. And unfortunately, this rabbi had a child. The child was sick, and unfortunately, the child passed away. During Shiva, which you can imagine was an intensely emotional time, a lot of people came over to visit the rabbi, including the people who came to visit was a group of these teenagers, right, who were very much not on the straight and narrow path and having a lot of challenges in life. And they came over to the rabbi and said, we want to, in order to comfort you and in the merit of your son, we are going to make a commitment to observe Shabbos one time. Right? This group, about 10 boys, we are going to make a commitment to observe Shabbos one time. This rabbi became incredibly emotional. He was incredibly moved, and he thanked these boys from the bottom of his heart. When the boys left, the person came over to this rabbi and said, I don't understand. Why is this meaningful to you? They did not observe Shabbos last week. They're not going to observe Shabbos next week. Great. One Shabbos, they didn't violate Shabbos. Who cares? What's the difference? It doesn't mean anything for the future. And this rabbi looked at him and he says, do you not understand what it means that these kids are going to be observe Shabbos? Every Jew is considered to be a child from God, of God. What does it mean to observe Shabbos? These Jewish boys are committing to God. We are going to spend one Shabbos with you, our Father in heaven. And the rabbi looked at him and said, I would give anything in the world to be able to spend one more Shabbos with my child that was lost. Right? This is the value of doing one mitzvah. Right? Even just doing one mitzvah. It is connecting in the most deep, real, and meaningful way with our Father in heaven. It's priceless, right? Its value is infinite. So therefore, in our own lives, we should strive to include more mitzvahs and to pursue more, but also to reach out with our friends, to our friends and to our family, to our neighbors, and say, I have an incredible opportunity for you. Be a part of this. Let's transform the world together. Let's fulfill the mission, the purpose of what it means to be a Jew, and let's connect to our Father in heaven. I want to remind everyone that next week, February 1st, begins our new course, 6 Wednesdays, Meet the Torah's bestsellers and learn how they gained their titles. We're going to look at all the different genres of Jewish literature, biblical texts, the Talmud, the Medrash, Musar, Kabbalah, Chassidus. What are the most famous books? Who are their authors? How do these books work? How do they function? What is their message for us? And we're going to actually experience and learn from each of those texts during those 6 weeks. I believe so strongly in this course that we have a special treat. At lesson 1, we're going to have phenomenal kosher sushi from Chicago. I want you to come. You're going to benefit from it physically, spiritually. Check out the class. You will enjoy it. I think it's going to be so good that if you come back for a second class, we're going to have deli sandwiches. My father-in-law sponsored deli sandwiches. The next 4, I don't know about. Maybe we'll be hungry. I don't know. But come to the class. Please check it out. No obligation to continue, but I think that it'll blow you away. You'll love it. You'll enjoy it. It'll be very meaningful to you. There is also the option to take it on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, I don't know how we do the sushi and the sandwiches, but you will gain from it and you will enjoy it.